I'm just really
Okay.
glad you're here.
Me too.
So,
Okay.
Amanda, why don't we start off with you? Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the ALS community?
Absolutely. I have in my family, we have had 15 people that have had ALS.
Wow.
It first really started coming to our attention. My grandfather had it. My grandfather was one of nine. Seven ended up having it. At that time, the women, my great aunts, they assumed it was MS. And it wasn't until, the next generation, it actually wasn't even my father's generation. It was my cousin, Jessica. Sorry, we're having a catastrophe here. Sorry, literally. Um, she was diagnosed right after she had her daughter. And at that point, that's when our family started getting a little bit curious. And so my other cousin, her sister, went through, she was a military dependent, went through, had some testing done. And the next thing we know, we're all involved in, at this point, then my grandfather's siblings, families are noticing the same things down their line. So we
Wow.
all started getting involved, doing some rather large family reunions. We got involved with Washington University in St. Louis. They have a genetic, uh, I don't know, they study genetics, and my family's originally from Missouri. And then we got involved with Dr. Michael Benatar at the University of Miami. I think he was at Emory at the time, but now he's at Miami. And I guess I've been doing that research for the last 10, 11 years. So I go down a couple times a year to the
Wow.
hospital, do some testing, and it's just kind of taken on a life of its own.
Yeah, so for the last 15 years, you've been heavily involved in the ALS community, primarily through that familial connection.
Yes, so far so good.
Yeah,
So
wow.
it's kind of
So,
crazy.
and I know that your background is actually you're a school psychologist, so
Yes,
you're a mental health professional.
yes.
So, yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the mental health concerns that have come up either for your own family members or for yourself, or other people you know in the ALS community?
Sure. We've had, so in my family, it's been kind of interesting where my father was from that generation that you just didn't talk about things. As a matter of fact, he would never go get an official diagnosis.
Mm.
Now, towards the last year, from what I can remember and what I saw, he had a very slow progression until the last probably 2 months, and then he went downhill really quickly. Um, Other family members have taken more of an approach like Dagmar does, or my co-moderator, and have really embraced living the best that they can and being mindful and practicing some, positive mental health. And so
Mhm.
that's come up a lot lately on our forum. It's been quite interesting, and we've really, Dagmar and I have been in contact a lot with Kevin and a few other people involved, just trying to make sure that we're providing the resources we need, talking about mental health in a way that's encouraging, people to seek it out, to seek out counseling. And I think that that's an area that we're kind of afraid to talk about.
Mhm.
ALS, like a lot of diseases, is terminal. What is uncommon about it is everybody who has it, the path is so different, and there's no specific milestones or uh, steps in the disease progression. There's some people that have very similar paths, and other people that they're completely different, and so that grieving cycle, that anticipating what's going to happen, is different for everybody.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something, some of the people on our forum had commented that when they go to the doctor and they get a diagnosis, they get the diagnosis and that's it. The doctors don't talk to them. And I really don't think that that's how all medical teams are.
Mhm.
Of course, people talk about things that scare them. They don't always, talk about the things that went well. And with ALS, you're getting diagnosed, I'm sure you're not thinking anything's going well. But especially for those people that have a pre-existing condition like bipolar, depression, any type of mental health issue, and then you put a pandemic on it, and then you get a diagnosis of ALS, and
Wow.
there's nobody there to talk to, and nobody that understands it. I think it's really important to start reaching out and looking for counselors who can help you work through the grieving process and the acceptance process, and in whatever way you can have some kind of control over preparing for, whether it takes whether the course takes 20 years or the course takes 2.5 years, which is about average, but just having some kind of control over it, and, being able to be mindful and enjoy what you do have and what you can do at that moment versus focusing on what you can't, because that would be the easy thing to do, would just be caught up in that, just all of the negative. And there's a lot of negative, obviously.
Yeah, and Amanda, you touched on something that I think a lot of people struggle with mental health in general, and it's finding help. And I don't know, are there a lot of mental health professionals who specialize in talking about end of life grief as it relates to a terminal illness? Like, where would people start looking for that kind of support?
We that's yeah, we just posted something. I don't have it with me, but I'll be glad to share it. We found a couple of websites that do just that they tell you, the step by step how to, prepare for, whether you're talking about actually preparing for your own funeral or making decisions about how you want to live. Do you
Hmm.
want certain kind of care? Do you want a feeding tube? Those types of things, medical decisions, so that you can make those decisions while you're healthy. So you can, but you need to also keep in mind that sometimes people's perspective on that changes as it progresses. And they did have a list of what to look for in a counselor. And although I don't believe there are counselors that are going to specifically be knowledgeable about ALS, you might have some just from their own personal experience with someone, with a pals or family member or somebody. However, I don't think that that's going to be the route that you go when you're looking for somebody. But there are people who specialize in preparing people for the end of life, or just dealing with a terminal illness or an illness that continues to progress. I kind of struggle to even say terminal illness, because when you look at ALS, and a few years ago you would get this, it lasts, most people are diagnosed, they live 2 to 5 years, with the average being 2.5 years. Well, if you look in our forum, we have people that have lived 10 years, 15 years. My cousin Jessica, who we lost about a year and a half ago, she's fabulous. If you ever get a chance, she's got some videos on YouTube. She lived 16 years.
Wow.
So I wonder if that data has been updated. But with people living longer and us being more familiar with things like mindfulness and mental health, and I think mental health has been getting a lot of attention the last year because of COVID. I
Yeah,
think now's the time that we really need to focus and kind of get those specialties going, so that those people can get the support that they need. The
for
forums are
sure.
great, but some people need more, and they need that face to face if they can get it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if there are people on this Instagram Live who aren't aware, the forums are a great place to connect with other people who can relate to whatever, like everything that you're going through, whether you're a caregiver or a person with ALS yourself. Um, Amanda, I was reading some research about mental health as it relates to ALS, and I was surprised to find that research shows, and this was from Massachusetts General Hospital, I think, that depression actually decreases the closer or the later on in the person's diagnosis. Do you have any guesses as to why that might be? The depression is usually the strongest at the time of diagnosis, and then as the disease progresses, it seems to get alleviated and they're more filled with joy, it said.
I want to read that. It Part of it would make sense. I was trying to read up on some of these, and I did come across that article. Uh, just trying to prepare for the Instagram Live. I completely would understand why it would be overwhelming initially. That makes sense to me. I want to see how long the people have been living with ALS. I wonder if that would make a difference.
Right.
If it's a quick progression, or somebody who's slow progressing, the age of life might matter. I've seen that come up quite a few times in the forum, where
Mm-hmm.
one community member is saying something like, well, I'm really young and you might be living for 10 years, but I don't even know what the age difference were, but it was like, 30 to 60. And,
Mm-hmm.
so the perspective is very different. I would think it would be logical if they were getting the support that they needed and accepting the disease, or if they're so uncomfortable that they're ready, that I
Yeah.
think back to my dad, and my dad was, He was ornery. His last like 5 or 6 weeks, he was in a hospital bed in his living room, and he was just aggravated. He was very independent and just typical for his age, I guess. But he got really ornery, and then his last couple of days where he was awake and able to talk to us, he was kind of sarcastic, and which he was all the time. But he was back to himself.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish he would have gotten. I wish he would have believed in mental health and believed in mindfulness and believed, you know. So yeah, that's. I don't know where I was going now.
No, I think that's a really, really great point. And I just wanted to ask you, like, what do you think people who are surrounding a person with ALS who may not be open to talking about it or who may not, as you say, believe in mental health or getting help, is there anything that caregivers or family members can do to support their mental health, maybe without even, pushing them into counseling? Like, are there other ways to help someone like that?
Absolutely. One, just as with anything, if you're stressing about anything, it is so important to be self-aware and to take the breaks and to be able to ask for help. And most
Mm-hmm.
people, especially if you're a caregiver, you're not used to asking for help. You're used to solving the problems. And I know for us, we were very fortunate because it was me, my sister, my stepbrother, and my stepmom were all there. And we were taking shifts, and we had some heated moments, I'll be honest with you, because people, like I said, everybody sees it differently, and sees what people should be doing.
Oh, Amanda, I think you're frozen. We'll just wait a minute, everyone. Hopefully Amanda comes back to us. That was a really, really good bit of information she was sharing. Oh, this has been one of the most exciting Instagram lives that I've been a part of. That's for sure. You never know what's going to happen. Just want to thank everyone for joining us. I can see there's quite a few people watching right now, and that's awesome. I think there's a lot of interest in this conversation. It's a really important topic, and as Amanda was saying, there is an amount of support in the ALS forums. You can find them at alsnewstoday.com/forums. I was in there earlier today. It's a very active forum community. It's a great place to connect with other caregivers, other patients, to stay on top of the latest research. I know that Amanda had told me that her phone battery was quite low. So I'm just going to check my other messages and see if that's perhaps what happened, if her phone died. So you just bear with me for 1 minute. Yes, she's typing, so I suspect that her phone did die. So unfortunately, I think that's the end of the conversation, but I do really want to thank all of you for being here. I hope that you were able to hear what Amanda had to say about mental health and ALS. I think that the fact that we're having this conversation is a reason to celebrate and a reason to feel optimistic, because mental health has been a conversation that's been in the shadows for far too long. And it's really important. And it's important that people feel like they're not alone, that people reach out for help when they need it. And Amanda shared that, seeking help, seeking counseling, there's nothing to be ashamed in that. And it can really, really help you deal with the grief and the loss that comes with an ALS diagnosis. So again, I just want to thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a great night. Thanks again.